Another reason why I left religion, the church, Calvinism, and Christianity is that churches deny mental health issues and think it's the result of sin or lack of belief. So if you've ever grown up in a church or visited a church that focused its priorities on things like prayer, faith, submission, and just general servitude, you probably have been involved in a situation or an environment where your devotion and access to a structure and a religious community hinged on how loyal and involved you were. If you're from religions that aren't Christianity, like Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Judaism, every religion has its own regulation for membership, do's, don'ts, and expectations. But I've been in therapy for almost 3 years. And one of the biggest issues I have with the church is how they respond, or in the churches and denominations I've been in, the absolute lack of response concerning mental illness or mental health issues. My own sister has told me she does not believe in psychology or psychiatry because she believes it goes against her religion. And she will never see a therapist because it goes against her worldview. And I don't remember a single sermon or curriculum in my fundamentalist Christian schoolwork that ever covered mental illness. And I don't mean the common parts of mental illness, from depression, anxiety, panic attacks, anger issues. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actual, serious, really deep illnesses. And I don't mean to minimize anybody's mental health. I'm talking about disorders like bipolar, schizophrenia, PTSD, they're usually lifelong mental illness. Depression is one of those. It can be either. It can be chronic, it can be acute. Sometimes it can be both. And I have chronic long-term depression. It was never something that was ever talked about, hinted at, laughed at, like nothing. And I grew up in a family that never talked about it. And anytime someone with some form of anti-normal behavior, and I mean normal behavior is relative, depending on what country, race, age, and gender we're talking about. Normal is different to different people. But I'm talking about people who, for some reason, they create scenes, they scream, they act in ways that some people would call developmental issues, behavioral issues. And I have many people in my family that have behavioral or learning disabilities. We wouldn't classify these as mental disorders, but in the 90s, people treated you like you had a mental disorder. And this was before words like autism was even mainstream. And people who have really what I would classify as the taboos of mental disorder, like depression, anxiety, the more feminine someone is, I never want to say it's harder for women to have these issues, but there is, I think, more pressure on women to be perfect, to be beautiful, to be thin, to be everything to everybody, but nothing to themselves. I mean, women put themselves last so much. And women's mental health is just wasn't talked about my entire life. I'm so glad that most businesses offer in America mental health days, mental health discussions and seminars, and an open door policy for people who need to see a counselor or, just need people to create a support system for them. But 25 years ago, there just wasn't a talk very much in my circles for mental illness. There just wasn't. And you add religion or political ideology into a recipe that normal atheistic people can hardly talk about mental illness. You add all these other factors and ingredients and beliefs, you're creating an environment. It gets harder and harder to talk about mental illness because in the 3 denominations and 7 churches I was in my 30 years of life, they viewed mental illness like a punishment. I mean, the only mental illness I ever heard about in the Bible that was discussed once or twice was King Saul. And his mental illness, it was always implied, was a punishment for him not believing in God enough or disobeying God. It was never ever said that he had a mental illness because it was something that just happens. It's part of being a human being, and every time a baby's born, there are stats that some child somewhere will be born with development issues, behavioral, learning disabilities, speech impediments, autism, and a lot of things didn't even have names until I was in junior high. There are